you got your number one receiver reading books on the sidelines.
It's been the number one Amazon bestseller now for like 10 days in a row.
We'll probably figure this guy, if he's reading it during a playoff game, this got to be a good book.
Tony, thanks so much for joining us and sitting down for this Q&A. Just over time, as someone who's covered football and covered the coaching industry, you've been such an important figurehead and such an important role in all that. And I'm just wondering now, does it feel like you've been out of it for as long as you've been in it at this point? Or like, how does it feel now that we see another coaching cycle come? Is there anything inside you that misses the action of it? Or what's that feeling like every year now?
I'll tell you what, Connor, especially these last 2 years, the first 14 years with NBC, I was in the studio. So maybe we hit 2 big games a year. Well, now Rodney Harrison and I are out going to games every week and getting in that atmosphere, talking to coaches and players on the sidelines, being in the stadium. You do miss that. You miss that competitive portion of things. You miss the energy. So it's been fun for me. I'm still involved and I enjoy it, but there is a little, sometimes you say, man, it'd be nice to try to put one more together.
Do you think that'll ever go away though? Is that just an innate part of like who you are?
I think it is part of who you are. Rodney and I, we're constantly throwing stuff at the television and what are they doing? How could you run out of bounds at that situation? How could you throw the ball? So you never lose that part of it for sure.
When was the last time like you would think like, okay, this was a very serious, like I almost got back in? Like if you had to think about it now, I mean, like you said, you've had such a long studio career now, but was there a time after you retired where it was like, I could have gotten back in, like the last serious one?
I was talking to Martin Mayhew when he was general manager of the Lions. I was recommending Jim Caldwell, and I thought Jim would be the perfect guy for Martin. And Martin had played for me in Tampa. So we're going back and forth, and he's listening about Jim. And then he said, well, I just have to ask you one thing for the Ford family. Would you consider this? And I grew up in the Detroit area. The Lions were my dad's favorite team. And I said, Martin, if my dad was still alive, you probably would have me. And that's the closest I got to it. Usually people would call and I'd just even dismiss it without even thinking about it. That one I had to think a little bit.
What do you make of, as we get into the playoffs now, the Lions being one of the number one teams? And one of the cool things when I talked to Dan Campbell, you brought up your dad and he said, so many people just came up to me and said, like, I wish my parents were here to see this. I wish they were here to see the Lions like this. Well, what does it mean to you personally to see them kind of going on a run like this?
Yeah, we covered them early in the year, and I remembered, I was 8 years old. First game my dad ever took me to, Lions at home against the Cleveland Browns. Jim Brown and Paul Warfield was a rookie, and my dad's telling me the history of the game. And I'm almost 70. I was 2 years old when the Lions won their last championship. I remember my dad talking about it. I don't remember anything, but it's been that long. And so to go home and hear my buddies and my friends and their parents just excited about the team again, and to hear Calvin Johnson say the atmosphere has never been like this in my lifetime. It's pretty amazing, and I think Brad Holmes and Coach Campbell and that staff, you have to give them a ton of credit for bringing the life back into the organization.
Is there a Dan Campbell in your eyes in this year's group of prospective head coaches, like someone who could have that kind of an impact somewhere else?
I think there's some people. I've really been impressed with Brian Flores and what he's done in Minnesota. And I think he's a leader. He's a guy who has head coach experience, and what he's done with that defense and the way his defensive players talk about him. He's a guy that I would definitely look at. Obviously, the two guys in Detroit, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, are getting a lot of exposure. There are young guys who just need opportunities, and it's going to be an interesting cycle. It really is.
I was just curious what it meant to you, or what you thought when we had Notre Dame and Penn State playing each other in the semifinals, and for the first time we were guaranteed a coach of color in the national championship game. To me, that's stunning that we're in 2025 for college, like, and just how long that took. And as someone who can obviously appreciate, breaking those barriers, I mean, what did you make of that, just seeing that game?
It took me back to my buddy Tyrone Willingham. He knew the Stanford way of doing things. He'd been very successful, and he went to Notre Dame. And I asked him, I said, Tyrone, why would you leave a place where you're so comfortable and you've got it going so well? And he said, well, at Notre Dame, I would have a chance to win a national championship, and I think we need that. And he took a chance. And it didn't work out, but that was his thought process. And that was, 15, 18 years ago. And it hasn't really happened. It hasn't germinated. I remember when James Franklin left Vanderbilt and went to Penn State, and I thought the same thing. He's done a great job at Vanderbilt, but now he's in a position, he's at a school where you can win it. And to me, that's the neat thing about this. When you start seeing guys get opportunities at schools where you have a chance to ring the bell, that's going to be a whole different perspective now.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like we're seeing two sides of the coin in the NFL this year, where certainly New England did things one way, and on the other side, you're having teams that are interviewing 25 guys, that these things are getting drawn out really late into January. This has been the most robust search that I can remember. Do you think that other candidates are kind of opening people's eyes a little bit to the fear of, like, what are we missing, and maybe they're not going in as hard-headed?
It is. People are thinking outside the box a little more, but I look at some of these big searches as the wrong way to do it, Connor. Because I grew up in the Pittsburgh system, and Dan Rooney had a philosophy, and he knew what he was looking for. And when I talk to a lot of these owners, they really don't know what they're looking for. So they are just searching and trying to turn under every stone. Here's what Dan Rooney did for 55 years. I want a young coach, because I don't want to do this every 5 or 6 years. So I want somebody in their 30s that's going to be here for 20 years. We're a cold weather, blue collar city, so I want defense. That's what we're going to hang our hat on. And I want somebody who's a great teacher and a great communicator. So he could narrow things down right away. There might be a million great guys, but here's what works for the Steelers. This is what we're going to look for. So he's interviewing 30-ish defensive coaches that are great teachers. And in 1969, he comes up with unknown Chuck Noll. And then in 1992, he comes up with little-known Bill Cowher. And then in 2006, he comes up with little-known Mike Tomlin. Well, he knew what he was looking for. So he didn't have to interview 500 people. And I think that's what's missing with some of these people. They're not sure what they're looking for. So I better talk to everybody that's hot. I better talk to, every candidate that is under the rug. Figure out what you want. And that's what I always ask guys when they talk to me, owners, general managers. Do you want young? Do you want experience? Do you want offense? Do you want defense? Do you want, just tell me what you're looking for, and then I can give you 3 or 4 names of who might be good. When you just say, well, tell me who's good, tell me who's dynamic, that takes in a lot of territory.
How often do you find yourself in in kind of that crossfire still? And what does that mean to you that owners and GMs and everybody kind of still, they want your opinion on that?
Yeah, a little less than before. I do get asked now because of the television contacts, and hey, you've interviewed this person, this guy. A lot of the people who work for me are now kind of out of the loop, but I used to get asked quite a bit about the Mike Tomlins and Leslie Frazier's and people that had been under me.
As someone who has a respect for how hard it is to turn a team around, to get a team to where it needs to be, do you laugh every year that Mike Tomlin's going to the playoffs every year and everyone's still like, oh, should we move on from Mike Tomlin? Is it time to let it go? And it drives me crazy.
I do. I just shake my head at that. And then I'm upset at some of these teams, and you mentioned it. I think the New England Patriots made a great hire with Mike Vrabel, but the process is so messed up. And to hire Gerard Mayo and only give him 1 year and say, well, I didn't like the way it was going. For the Raiders to do that with Antonio Pierce, it just, that speaks to me of people that don't know the process, don't know what they're doing, don't learn from history. I played for Chuck Noll, who won 4 Super Bowls. He was 1-13 his first year. I played for Bill Walsh in his first year in San Francisco. Joe Montana was our backup quarterback rookie. We won 2 games. Okay, that's 3 more Super Bowls. Okay, Tom Landry won 1 game his first year. So that's 9 Super Bowls with guys that won 2 games or less their first year. And so to say, well, we need more progress, or I expected us to be better right away, it doesn't always go that way. I was 0-5 my first year, and our owners took me to lunch. I thought they were going to fire me. And they said, no, we just want you to know this is a long-term process. We're in it for the long haul. Don't panic. We ended up going 1-8 before we turned it around. But that thought process seems to be gone now. Hey, yeah, we did an exhaustive search. We came up with Gerard Mayo. He's our guy. And then 11 months later, he's not our guy. It just doesn't make sense to me.
That's interesting too, because I was talking to a couple veteran coaches about this, and it seems like the lack of time to develop is sort of it's connected in some way to kind of the epidemic we have of like clock management issues, some of this stuff in games. Like, do you see that too from your chair?
Yeah, you do. And people learn and they grow and they get better, and that's part of it. And I was an assistant for 15 years, and I thought knew everything. I'd worked for Denny Green, for Marty Schottenheimer, for Chuck Noll. I'm going to be ready to go. There's nothing I need to know. Well, the first day on the job, things start coming up that, wow, I never thought of that. I'm in my office trying to hire my staff. I'm calling guys, and the director of operations comes in and says, hey, coach, hey, welcome. It's good to have you here. I need to know today what hotels we want to stay at on the road and what airline we want to use as our commuter airline. Like, I don't know. I don't care. I never thought about that. Well, we need to know. We got, those are the kind of things that hit you that you're not prepared for. And then, hey, I've got player so-and-so, and he's got this issue, and he needs to come talk to you. Well, I never had that before. I never talked to the offensive players, and now you got to do all that. And so there's a growing cycle that has to happen, and there's things that you can't be prepared for because you haven't dealt with them. Well, you're going to learn how to deal with them, and you're going to get better at that. But it's a process. And, to think that in 2 games or 6 weeks, you can be perfect at it. You're not going to be. And I think we have really bad expectations in that regard.
I remember doing a story a couple of years ago where I talked to like Andy Reid, Jason Garrett, Brian Billick, a couple of guys in that era, just about what the biggest surprise was when they sat in the chair for the first time. Like, what was the one thing that they were like, I didn't know I had to do this? Was it the airline for you?
That was a crazy one. And then one of the things I did, we'd had 13 straight losing seasons at Tampa. So I called every veteran on the roster, introduced myself over the phone, and said, I want you to come in and see me. And I want to hear from you why we haven't won since you've been here. And I wanted to hear from them. Well, there were a lot of things. Hey, they took the Coke machine out of the locker room. We used to have free Cokes, and now we don't. We're staying at these different hotels that are off the beaten path. Well, I found out Sam Weiss liked that because he didn't want to be downtown with the distraction. So it wasn't that the owners were cheap. And it wasn't that, they didn't know what they're doing. That's what the coach wanted. So, hey, that's easy to fix. I went to the owners, and they said, you can stay wherever you want. Well, that was one thing that, helped the players. But learning those things, I'm thinking, hey, we just got to get the quarterback squared away, or we've got to get this going. Culture and changing the culture and figuring out what the culture is, it was different. We had a building that was built in the 70s for the original Bucks. It had 40 lockers for the players and 9 lockers for the coaches. Well, now we had 53 guys on the team, And so we got 13 guys sharing lockers. We've got coaches sharing lockers. You don't think you're going to have to deal with that as the head. That's not even on your radar. Well, how am I going to handle that? What's going to happen? Herm Edwards, my assistant head coach, he took a closet for his office because we didn't have enough offices. Things like that. People don't understand all the things that go into it. It's not just, okay, what's going to happen with our rookie quarterback?
Does it blow your mind sometimes? Like, you talk about like rapid growth and change. And from when you first came in as a player to a coach to now, you're in these facilities and you're talking to these teams and the resources at their disposal. Like, does it just blow your mind?
It does. I was in the Vikings facility for the first time last week interviewing their coach for our broadcast. There's 2 fireplaces in the locker room. They've got these cold tubs and hot tubs, especially designed for each player. They've got individual diets and meals for guys, whether they need to lose weight or gain weight or maintain. They've got all this electro stuff that they put on to find out how far they'd run in practice. And it was amazing to me as they took me around the building, and I said, well, this is a long ways from Three River Stadium in our 15 by 20 weight room that have one universal gym.
Just to shift gears a little bit, you've had a long track record too of mentorship, and I was really interested in, for example, you flip through Instagram now, and everyone's got advice for young men, young women today, but you were kind of ahead of the curve. Some of the books that you'd written, some of the stuff that you'd done in your career. What is it like now? I mean, do you still find yourself enjoying doing mentoring, writing, and kind of just thinking about not just like the future football players, but just like future men and women?
I do, and that's really important to me, Connor. I went to Houston a couple of weeks ago to interview D'Amico Ryans for our show, and CJ Stroud waited after the interview, and he sat there outside the coach's office and said, I'd love to talk to you just about how can I be a better leader? How can I lead my guys? And I'm shocked. This guy's 23 years old. I didn't even know he knew who I was. And he's talking about, how did Peyton Manning do this? And I'd like to hear from you. And it was incredible, but it was really gratifying. We had about a 45-minute conversation and didn't talk football at all. We're just talking about being the leader for his guys and how to help his guys grow. It was pretty stunning, but I do enjoy that, and it is a fun part of what I do.
I read somewhere that you said almost that the book writing process and getting some of your thoughts on paper was almost as gratifying as the Super Bowl in a lot of ways.
It was to hear guys, and they come up to me now, Chris Jones, hey, I read your book and I read your devotional, and it's got good stuff every day, and I want to thank you for it. And guys that are really, really young. And that's one of the things that the book publisher told me when they were trying to talk me into doing it. You can have a chance to influence people that you may never meet. And I had never thought about that before, but it has taken place. I've talk to coaches now that say, gosh, I remember reading your book and what you said about this particular situation helped me. And again, that is gratifying.
What's like relaxed Tony doing these days? Like, what's going on with everybody away from football, and how is everybody, like, what's life like?
Well, life is still crazy for me. We've adopted a bunch of kids. We have one son who's a freshman in college now. We've got one who's a sophomore in high school. They're football players. We've got some middle schoolers that are playing flag football. So my schedule during the fall was Thursday night middle school football, Friday night high school, Saturday go to Butler, watch my son play, and then fly to our game on Sunday. And so it's hectic, but it's fun. And then associating with different people. One of my son's high school teammates was probably the top 10 recruits in the country. He's going to be an offensive lineman at Oregon. And he's talking to me, hey, your older son went to Oregon. Tell me about the campus. Tell me about the setting. And to be able to counsel him a little bit as he's trying to make a decision. Those are fun things that just kind of go with the territory.
What did it mean to bring in, like you said, I mean, it was eight kids, right, that you adopted. That's incredible. What did it mean to bring that energy into your family, and how gratifying has that been?
it's been fun to see them grow and progress. And one of the reasons we did it, there was an organization here in town that asked us to do a public service announcement for them because they said they needed adoptive parents. Their idea and their goal was to place kids in homes, kids that needed homes. And it stunned me because I thought, well, people who adopt, I hear these stories of going overseas or being on waiting lists. And this lady said, no, we have kids right here in Tampa that need homes. And so that's what impacted my wife and I. And 24 years ago, we adopted a little boy, and we saw his life, how it changed, and that we could be there to provide some things he needed. And so we've done it 7 times more since then.
It's amazing. Do you think that's an innate, like, I guess to tie it back to the conversation about coaching, like we think about, when we're hiring people now, we think about hiring play callers. It has to be, you have to know this offense, but like there has to be that innate kind of, you have to have the ability to love and care for a lot of people, to be really good at it,
Yeah, no, and I learned that from Chuck Noll. I was a 3-year player, got cut a couple times, traded. Suddenly I'm out of football, and Coach Noll called me and said, I'd love to have you on my staff and build a career for you. I went into his office that first day and I said, what does a coach do? What am I supposed to do? How do you want me to function here? He said, only thing I need you to do is help your players be the best they can be. And as soon as he said that, Connor, the light went off in my man. That's why I love playing for this guy so much, because he didn't feel like he had to be the boss. He didn't feel like he had to be the smartest guy in the room. He was there to help us be the best he could be. So that became my mantra for the next 28 years. I'm going to help my players. And because of my mom and dad and the way I was raised, I felt that help was not just be the best athlete you can be or the best cornerback or the strongest guy, but if I can help you grow as a person. And so I wanted to do that. And I did that as an assistant. Some owners didn't think that maybe that was the best way to go, or that wasn't what they were looking for as a head coach. But when I came to Tampa, Malcolm Glazer, that's what he wanted. He wanted that development. And so to be able to help our guys and to now look back 25 years and see Ward done charities and doing homes for single moms, and John Lynch, he's the general manager of the 49ers, but he had a program in Tampa, scholarships for needy kids that he ran here for 8 or 9 years. And to see Derek Brooks with his YMCA bunch that just flourished, that to me is just as much a part of what I want to do as trying to win Super Bowls.
Do you think that the NIL era will give us college kids who end up, just by virtue of being in college longer, will they come out with a more robust idea of who they are as a player and more developed? Or do you think that this is kind of a pinballing process for some of these young guys?
I'm concerned about the process. I'm concerned that we aren't teaching the right things. As players come and they're there a year and, well, it didn't work out the way I thought. I didn't get as much playing time, or I did have a pretty good first year, but now this school says I can have $250,000 instead of $75,000, and maybe I should go there. And I don't think we're teaching them about teamwork and sacrifice and perseverance as much as we are, well, your opportunity will be defined by how good you are, and that's going to lead into a lot of other things. I'm concerned about that.
It almost makes it makes the NFL head coaching job seem more daunting, maybe, or it really necessitates a certain kind of person when you get these guys at that point.
I remember talking to players at the combine, and you'd get that 15-minute window. I never asked them about their position or what they did. I asked them about growing up and what their goals are and things like that, and trying to decipher if they're going to be a good teammate or they're going to be a good coach or a good buck. And you talk about things that really required sacrifice and perseverance. A guy, hey, I didn't get to play my first 3 years, but I hung in there and I was playing behind a great player. And then when I finally got my opportunity, I took advantage of it. Well, nowadays, if I was in that room, you're talking, well, yeah, I transferred 3 times and I went here and I left Texas because I got a little more NIL money. And then I didn't get to play as much. So I went to Oregon and yeah, it blossomed. And I would take that as a negative, but unfortunately that it is life right now. And that's the way it is. So I would have to change my filter a little bit and say, you know, maybe I can't give a guy a check mark for persevering, or I can't downgrade a guy that didn't hang in there. And I just think we're probably teaching the wrong values.
Are you talking to any college coaches? Like, are you on the ground with any of those guys at all? Or
I do. My oldest son went to Oregon, so I have some ties and connections there. And I talked to Dan Lanning this offseason, this summer, and he told me that his job has really changed. He said, I really don't coach that much anymore. I counsel. I'm always putting with my arm around the player. Hey, don't leave. I know you didn't get the ball as much as you thought, but we got plans for you. Or Connor, no, you had a great game, and I know you've got 10 people now who are recruiting you, but we still got plans. He said that's all he does. And I started thinking about that and saying, gosh, is that really what we want our head coaches to do? But that's life in the Power Fives right now.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, another thing, you know, like we were saying, how life changes, you know, and how everything changes. But I thank you so much. This is super cool. You were the first person I thought of when they said we just wanted to do an issue of just question and answers. I find you super interesting, and you know, have followed you ever since I started covering the NFL. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, it's always great to talk to you. This has been fun. Talk to you
Absolutely.
soon.